Let me give you a pitch for positivity.
Please. Hey everyone, my guest today is a legendary entrepreneur. Henrik Werdelin has founded and incubated several unicorns, most notably the dog happiness company Bark. Henrik himself is a pretty happy guy, an optimistic guy who likes to ask what could go right. And on the day we recorded, he helped me see through some future of tech gloom.
As I'm getting older, instead of grumpy, I'm becoming more positive because I honestly think that is what I can give to the world.
In this episode, we talk about how AI could go right. Henrik believes it could unlock a whole new form of capitalism, a good one, a more customer-centric one. So we get into how that might happen and what we can do to help steer it in that direction, because things could go, well, they could go a different way. We'll also dig into Henrik's new book, Me, My Customer and AI, which he co-authored with Nicholas Thorne. Plus, and if this story doesn't make you laugh, really, I don't know what will, Henrik reveals how a prank gone wrong led to him meeting his Bark co-founder in the most ridiculous way.
I'm like in my boxers and trying to shake the hand of this dude that I've never met before over the shared blanket.
Of a heart-shaped bed.
The heart-shaped beds.
Welcome to Future Round and Find Out, where we celebrate the breakthroughs, call BS on the hype, and explore how things might go sideways and how we, together, can steer the future in the right direction. Hi, I'm Dan Blumberg. I'm an independent technologist and former NPR journalist, and on the show, you'll hear sharp takes on what builders need to know now. Learn more, sign up for the newsletter, and ask questions of upcoming guests at futurearound.com. I want to skip right to the end of your book. In the afterword, you and Nicholas paint two scenarios, which, paraphrasing, are AI bad and AI really, really good. Bad being extreme inequality and other things that you don't have to think too hard to imagine these days, I don't think. And then the really good version is there is a new, more customer-centric form of capitalism that emerges. And I'd love for you to sketch out what that future is that you think is possible and what needs to go right for us to get there.
You know, I've been thinking quite a lot about this, and I think as entrepreneurs, we often get told that the best way to predict the future is to make it. And so I've kind of taken that a little bit to heart, and I kind of feel that a lot of us was part of like the social web, and a lot of us did not see that we were in the process of creating mental health issues for a whole generation when we got excited about social engineering and taking pictures of food and sharing it. So I think this time around, and when it comes to AI, I think we need to create products and services that at least attempt to move us as a society towards a better place. And for me, that is about trying to democratize entrepreneurship and then realize that we have always been very proud of the mom and pop stores and the kind of like what we call everyday entrepreneurs, like the ones that are not unicorns, the one that's not being written up by TechCrunch. And so what the book is about and what Autos is about, which is this platform that we made, is all about trying to figure out if we can take the skills and the access and the capital and all these good things that we were fortunate enough to have access to that allowed us to build big companies, if we can now use AI to make that available to the 60% of Americans that say they would like to start something. And so what we outlined in the book is like this naive for sure, but positive version of the future where we all kind of like figure out what is the people that we're kind of should serve. Like what is a customer group that we both have authenticity and authority to kind of like help identify problems they have and then use AI to come up with solutions. And then move towards a place where helping others and helping others with technology, which obviously makes the helping scalable, is something that we can do. And of course, like I'm a capitalist like most other people, so I do think that there'll be a monetary kind of way that people can be compensated for solving those problems. But what I do hope is that instead of having a lot of the wealth being monopolized in fewer people, it's something that can kind of be split out to a lot of people. So where a lot of people talk about one-person unicorns, what we aspire to make is 1 million donkey corns, and a donkey corn's $1 million turnover businesses with 2 people or less. And so can we kind of like a little bit like things like YouTube did? Can we take the media landscape and then say everybody who has a real interesting and specific niche, they are now able to build a business on the back of that.
I love your optimism. I'm a little less wired that way, and I'm seeing a lot of things like the explicit nation state, like Trump administration, like this is a race that we must win. And also, you already referenced like the early days of social media, which looks so promising. You mentioned the mental health issues that came from it. I remember the Arab Spring moment, and it was like, oh my God, social media is going to like unlock democracy and give everyone a voice. And then the dictators kind of figured out how to use social media to their own end. So that's what I'm trying to pick at, of like, how do we not get there?
Let me give you a pitch for positivity.
Please.
It is not complicated. And it's not too difficult to come up with things that could go wrong. And, like I, of course, in my dark ILS kind of like go there too. I do think that we as people who show up to podcasts and have conversations, that we need to give people an idea of what is the alternative. And I think we almost have a responsibility to also kind of raise that voice, because honestly, the negative voice is out there in plenty. And I do think that momentum is oxygen, and at least like that's something I've learned from entrepreneurship. And if we don't have kind of like the excitement to kind of go to work, and we don't have the excitement to positively contribute to society, and we don't have the excitement to look at other people and assume that they might have bad sides to them, but they probably have good sides too, then it all doesn't matter. And so I'm actually increasingly, as I'm getting older, becoming, instead of grumpy, I'm becoming more positive, because I honestly think that that is what I can give to the world. And I respect and I agree with a lot of people who have negative voices, but I think it's almost more complicated to be the one who goes out and saying, yeah, but there's also these things and they're pretty good too. And, there is a path where we've been through a lot of different technology. We'll give you an example. Of course, we talk about like how technology and AI specifically is going to change employment. And that seemed to me to be very likely. But if you look at like when the ATM got installed, everybody in the bank industry was convinced that nobody would work in banking anymore. And hey, presto, it didn't work out that way. When they installed self-serve in McDonald's, everybody assumed that McDonald's would lay out all their staff. Turned out they started to hire more people. When we invented the cloud and we started to like not have our own data centers, same story. And so I think there's plenty of cases where these things actually didn't turn out to be as dramatic or as negative as we feared, but there was kind of some other path that we could go down. So I'm being the naive sucker that like paints that picture.
No, I like it. I mean, it actually reminds me of I think there's been studies that show like, if you're in a bad mood and if you just force yourself to smile, it actually makes you feel better. Like, so I hear you. And it is more risky to say like, what you just said, like, we're going to figure out a way that is in some ways a more risky statement than like, yeah, well, that's,
and I'll come with a disclaimer. I know it's easy for me to say, like I've been fortunate with my career, like I have all these kind of like things that are good in my life. And so a lot of people have much more hardship than me, I think, with good reasons and full, like it would be very fair to go like, yeah, it's easy for you, dude, right? So, but I do think that if we can kind of like add positivity to the world, then it could move a better place, and I'd like to live in that world.
Yeah. So in that afterward, you talked about how AI could lead to this new form of capitalism that's more customer centric. And you mentioned a lot of people use the analogy that AI is going to be like electricity. It's going to be everywhere. And you sort of play on that. What's the parallel there? What did electricity do that you see AI potentially having the potential to do as well in terms of changing how we do business?
Well, if we look at how like electricity got introduced, it changed a lot of structures, right? It wasn't suddenly that we used to have horsepower, right? And so we didn't take horsepower and then applied it to the factory. We invented factories, right? Like suddenly there was like something completely different that just was not possible before. We suddenly could work at different hours because we were not necessarily restricted because of daylight. And so I do think this is the same thing. In the book, we speculate a little bit. We talk a lot about this thing we call relationship capital. And relationship capital, in our view, going to be an increasing competitive mode, because we believe that AI is going to democratize basically the supply chain of products and services. So most people will be able to make most things. And when most people can do most things, what is the only thing that you can kind of use to be competitive? In our view, it's the relationship between the customer and the founder. It's basically the human in the loop that makes the difference. And so we outline our kind of thesis on why this relationship capital is something that you not only should be aware of, but you should kind of actively lean into. As part of that, and at the end of the book, we talk about if there is kind of like this increasingly abundant society where capital is not necessarily the driver, could it be this thing of helping people in a scalable way that becomes the capital, that relationship capital doesn't necessarily becomes only monetizable, but is also something that is the social currency, the social fabric that kind of move things forward.
You write that relationship capital is the moat that AI can't clone, whereas AI can, help you build features and can do all sorts of things that once were the domain of people, and that the compounding trust is strictly human made. What does that mean in terms of how entrepreneurs should be spending their time?
Well, I could be very kind of concrete on how I think about it. So I think relationship capital really have three components. The first thing is really about intensity or density, which is really how much does a customer feel seen when they're served by you. And I think that we do a poor job of putting hard values on hard numbers on some of these things. But for example, you could think of like how fast do you respond to a customer as being a metric for how much they feel seen. Obviously, if they write to you about something they feel is off and it takes you 3 days to respond, then they don't really feel seen very much. The second layer is really about how much do a customer feel that you're part of the community that you're trying to serve. And there's some company, like an NPS, for example, I think is a decent kind of metric of that. Obviously, the irony of NPS is that it's a metric that is created by companies to make it easy for them to kind of like just have one number that they can report internally.
Yeah.
Where the higher fidelity feedback is, of course, commentary and feedback and like in narrative. And we couldn't normally kind of figure a way around kind of understanding all that, but now with AI we can. But I think NPS is a good example of like if people like really feel that you're part of their crew. And there are other kind of brands that are there are brands that kind of famous for this, the Peloton, the Patagonia, where you wear the logo, the Harley Davidson, you wear the logo not just because that you like the garment, you also do it because it represents something about yourself.
Yeah, it's a tribe.
Exactly right. And the third one is really durability, which is we believe that companies should be defined by who they serve, not by what they make. And in the future, we think that companies that will do well are the ones who have the authenticity and the authority to offer a customer other than the initial thing they offered. And so like as a thought experiment, you can imagine that if I said that Nike just made a hotel, you would have a pretty clear idea what that hotel might be. But if I told you that, and Hilton is making a shoe, then you would be like, what? Like that doesn't really make any sense. And so if you look at the companies that I have been involved in, like Bark, who makes dogs happy and the people who love them, our next business wasn't another stuff in a box business. It was an airline for dog because we believe in making dogs happy, and that is kind of our North Star. The durability for me is specifically in HAI important because you'll have to kind of create so many new products and services so fast. And if you don't have the ability to do that because people don't feel that you have the relationship capital that makes you deserve that, then obviously you can't do it.
Yeah. I mean, how do you see that playing out just very, very practically in terms of what an entrepreneur should be spending their day-to-day doing? And in a world where with you building audits, there are agents and all sorts of other things that are helping them, at the same time.
Well, I think to start with, our pedagogy of entrepreneurship is slightly different than what you're probably taught at, Harvard Business School or, like other kind of places. We believe that the first thing for you to figure out is who do you want to serve and why? We have in the book these things we call the 5 Ps, which I don't have to go through here, but it's basically different ways of looking at yourself and figuring out what is the thing that I actually can be bothered spending the next 10 years on. And so that's a good start. Who do you want to serve? The second is what is a problem that they have? And so you're not even thinking of ideas yet. You're not thinking about technology platforms. You're just thinking about who do you want to serve and what's the problem they have. And then the ideas are really just thesis statements for how to solve that problem. And we believe AI can do that, of course. And so I guess fundamentally, I believe that there are different schools of thoughts of how you start a company. I think we have one kind of pedagogy of how to do that we've found success with. There are many others, and they're probably just as good. But that's the specific flavor that we like.
Yeah. And as you talk about, I can't remember all 5 of the pieces, but people, purpose, passion, you write a lot about ways that AI can help entrepreneurs get unstuck, whether with those questions or with others. Can you share a few examples of like your favorite prompts or ways that AI helps you or can help an entrepreneur get unstuck?
The by far biggest one, and I'll hold thing up my notepads here, is "it sucks that" statements, right? And "sucks that" statement is for me a very good way of articulating a meaningful problem. A lot of times when I hear ideas and that I feel a little bit meh, if I try to kind of like deconstruct what it is, it's because the problem they're solving is not very meaningful. It's like, yeah, that's probably fine. And I think other people have referred to as like the difference between a headache pill and a vitamin pill. Like you need something that actually is really meaningful. I found "it sucks that" is such a good statement to use because it's obviously a little bit kind of out there, but it really like if something really sucks, then you would be happy if somebody solve it. Now, the second reason why I think problems are good to start with instead of ideas is that everybody's very willing to talk to you about their problems. And not a lot of people are interested in talking to you about their ideas. And so if you sit in a random plane flying somewhere and ask, what's your best business idea? People are going to climb out real fast. But if you say, oh, interesting, you're working at the Maersk shipping company. What is your biggest business problem? They might say, oh, I'm shipping $1 billion worth of empty containers from the US back to China every year. And go, oh, that's an interesting problem. Like if I come up with a solution for that, there'll probably be a really good business.
Yeah. I mean, so just, I mean, I want to make sure people get the "it sucks that" method here, because it is very powerful. I've used it. I've worked with Prehype when I was at City Ventures. It's basically just taking a problem, but putting it in this very direct phrase of "it sucks that I have to do X, Y, Z. It sucks that," it is a very provocative way of putting it. Culturally, not every Americans I think are probably good with it, but not everyone else is as game to go there. It does help.
I took it down to my kid's 5th grade class the other day.
Yeah.
The teacher was a little bit, we're not really saying that word here.
Yeah.
But what's interesting? I mean, like, what was the business idea the kids came up with? He goes to an international school, my son, and so they felt it was annoying that a lot of the candy and food products that they had available, and so I think "it sucks" that statement was "it sucks that you can't get your local flavor of candy in the market," and so maybe inspired by having spoken about BarkBox, but they came up with this idea of basically making an international candy box, and the distribution plan was to put up notes around the school, and so that was a fun little experiment.
That's cool. I want to come back to the sort of future that you see coming. You write about a headless future, or also the agentic web. Paint a picture of what you expect to see here, what that might look like in a few years, and what folks ought to be thinking about and building now to be ready for that or help make it happen.
I guess we have long talked about the MVP, the minimal viable product. And I think for many of us, that's been an app or a website or something like that. And that became kind of like, if you like, the object of the startup that we are trying to come up with. We believe that in the probably near future, the kernel, the core of a startup is either one or several agents that helps you do different things. They help you identify, obviously, the customers, but it also helps you make the ads. It helps you reach out and have like a one-to-one conversation with customers and all those different things. And so in our world, the future of an MVP is basically this group of agents that is, your co-founder, if you like, that you surround yourself with. And now what then the object will be, what the execution of that will be, is what we think of as a headless agent. So it doesn't have an interface. until that we know what interface is most relevant for that specific business idea or for that specific audience. And so an interface or channel could be a website or an app or a browser plugin or a voice kind of like conversation agent or a WhatsApp group or a DM on Instagram or whatever it is. And so the way that we're building our new platform is that we help people come up with the problem and the solution. It creates that agents and that set of agents, and then we basically render the interface and whatever. And so we think that you're going to build startups as MVPs, but it probably minimal viable agents instead. And then the agents will basically come to life in the form that is most relevant. And so that's kind of like one of the core concepts that we write about in the book.
And can you give an example, other than the Autos platform itself, of people who are building minimum viable agents? I love that new term.
Yeah, I mean, like we were fortunate enough to be written up in The Economist recently, which was a bit of a bucket list item for me. And they wrote about this amazing founder called Sarah. And Sarah, unfortunately, lost one of her parents recently and figured out that basically that it was very difficult to get like the emotional grief support that she needed, but also like a lot of the practical kind of elements of this thing, like everything from estate planning to afterlife logistics and stuff like that. And so what she created on Autos was basically a business that reached out to people who have just had a loss in their life. And then it has a number of different agents that helps them kind of like figure out those different elements. And sometimes this agent comes to life, if you like, as a number you can call, or you can have a conversation with somebody. Sometimes it's a DM on Instagram. And so whatever, and sometimes you might have to, let's say a lot of people, when they have loss in their life, they kind of also realize that they should probably plan a little bit. So they might want to build a will. I'm not sure if that feature is there yet in our system, but you can imagine how it can help you build a will, and the output is a PDF. And so the channel is actually a rendition of that.
Yeah. This is actually my dad's business. My dad is a trust and estates lawyer, so he's very familiar with the end of life and the logistics and writing wills and creating trusts and all that. And I've also consulted with the company Trust and Will that also enables this. It is a very, very big problem, and one that folks should not wait too long to think about, unfortunately. You talk about AI allowing intimacy at scale. It's the phrase that you use, or you also call it neighborization, and you contrast that with personalization. I'm curious, like what do you mean by these phrases, and why do you want to avoid the word personalization, which has a bad rep?
I have a slight obsession with kind of like old school entrepreneurship. Like I am very inspired by people who created like physical stores or used to do that. And I think what they did was they created an environment for the people they serve that makes them feel at home without kind of them getting creeped out, right? So when people walk into your local corner store, your local bar, or your local artisanal shop, they don't necessarily go like, hey, user XYZ, like, this is like the one item that you want, right? Like what they do is that they have the context of the environment on which you live. And so they will refer to the weather, or they'll do something like that. And so I think AI will be able to do a lot of those things, or create a lot of those kind of environments for people to make them feel comfortable. And that could be something as easy as like just speaking the language. Like my native language is Danish. And so I just feel more comfortable in that language than I do in English. But it could also just be like creating kind of like, let's say that we sell a lot of stuff for dogs, right? I might want to render our whole website with Labradors because I have a Labrador. And so every time I walk into basically an online store that is filled with Labradors, I just feel much more at home, if you like. And so we talk about neighborhoodization as like the concept of using AI tools, rendering images that is personalized at scale, or translating languages to create an environment where I feel more seen and more belonging than what you can do with an Amazon page, which, is kind of more surgically kind of like personalized for me, but it's not necessarily a place where I feel at home. It's a place where I feel and go and visit.
Yeah. I mean, the Amazon pages that they're optimized for SEO and large cases, not for the person consuming it. Do you have some favorite examples of sites that are doing this well, or not necessarily sites?
I'll give you an example, which I think is maybe not what you're looking for, but I think it's an interesting example of what might be coming. Um, I noticed recently that a lot of the times that I use like services like Lovable and Replit is to basically do DIY SaaS. And
Hmm.
so increasingly, I have tools that I pay for, CRM systems or to-do list systems or newsletters. And what I'm doing now is I'm basically writing software just for myself to have it completely optimized around my world. It's an N01 piece of
Hmm.
software. And in many ways, I think that's the ultimate kind of like neighborhoodization, right? Like I'm building something that makes me feel totally at home because it's handmade for me. And in many ways, that unbundling of SaaS features is, I see as an example of people kind of like looking for that type of
Yeah.
service to be available.
Yeah. This is something that I talked about with the head of product for GitHub that got him the most excited. What were these N of one things? What are some of the things that you've built personally?
I mean, like, if I just take some of the things I mentioned, like my only must-read newsletter now is a newsletter that is a rendering of all the newsletters that I subscribe to. And it just, with some very specific prompting, kind of in bullet point form, kind of teases out the core insights or mental models that is being mentioned. And so every day I get this newsletter that has been written just for me, and it basically summarizes all these different ones. I created a CRM system, so I know a lot of people, and I'm not very good with names. And a lot of times when I need to get hold of somebody, it's not really their name or the title that's relevant. It's some kind of like meta structure around them. And so I basically created like the system that communicates with my Google contacts, and it slurps everything in. It then enriches this in all these different methods that I'd be able to come up with, and then put it in a vector database. It writes these very long descriptions of everything about people, but also like past emails, interactions I've had with them. And so when I then search for people that has ever been in a pre-hype workshop, then there's a good chance that your name will appear, but obviously it doesn't appear anything in your own kind of descriptors. And so
Right.
I find that to be useful.
That's cool. On the newsletter one, it's both a brilliant product. It makes a ton of sense. I've heard people writing about if people don't build this themselves, Gmail is going to do this for them at some point anyway. I'm curious what your prompt is, or what you're scanning for, and sort of which newsletters your newsletter automator is scanning for you.
Yeah, like what I do is I basically now auto tack everything with Substack that comes from Substack. But I have quite a lot of different types of things. And so I subscribe to everything from politics to AI, of course, to um, the most interesting one recently, a friend of mine introduced to is a statistician uh, who is also an escort. And so she writes very, very elegantly and very, very thoughtfully about, like relationships and sex, which I thought was just fascinating because like suddenly she go like, hey, this is not me saying it. We did an 18,000 people survey and this is what we figured out, stuff like that. So it's not it's a safe for work kind of like
Uh-huh.
newsletter, but anyway. So as you can hear, like a lot of different topics. And so I basically have it, first summarize each of them with 5 points to specifically try to figure out cases, mental models, basically new thesis. Then it takes all the newsletters and it looks if there's too much duplication, and it removes the duplication and it moves it up to the first section, which is basically overall themes. And then it kind of mentioned the overall themes. And then I then have a few kind of overall objectives I have for the quarter. And I had put that in and I go like, please see if there's anything that might help me kind of unstuck or get further with these specific projects. And so it's general themes, things that are specifically geared to where I should have my focus. And then it's
Yeah.
basically bullet points on like the different kind of insights or softwares or cases or mental models that's been mentioned, these other things. And then a link to the newsletter. So once I
Right.
see something that's just a little bit interesting, I just click that and then go
Yeah.
and read the
Yeah.
newsletter.
I think where that's really interesting is you're not just summarizing it, like help me digest these 10,000 words and put it into 100 words. You've actually told it your goals.
Yeah.
I'm looking to learn this. I want to, hear from these points of view, help me.
I've done another thing which I thought was like useful is I have like this mental model that I call the 8+1 framework, which is basically how I want to allocate my time, like what I see as success if I have like a nice balance of all these 8 boxes. And so I use Todoist as my to-do list. And so I created a backend system that talks to Todoist all the time. And that allows me two things. One, is very easy to get a lot of ideas in very fast. And so it allows me to make shortcuts on the Apple platform that I can just talk to and all this thing. But then I send all these kind of to-dos to a model to get enriched. And so depending on what the to-do is, it will have different kind of functions. And then I do a analytics of all my to-dos. And so by the end of the week, when I'm reviewing kind of like how I spent my week, it looks at what kind of buckets: family, fitness, relationship, like different kind of work projects, some that accumulate wealth over time, some that aggregate cash, some that are just about helping people. And so I can start to get an actual view on not on my time, but on my kind of like to-do efforts of how they kind of like play out over the week.
I love chatting with you because you're like a vision of the future. You're like a bionic man here with like this machine that's like, encouraging you, helping you, analyzing. And I think some of the things you're describing here will be more commonplace in the future. But
sure.
I love
I have another one for you. Can I give you more of these ones
please.
that I'm excited about? So the last thing I installed is called, is it called Warp? Have you heard about that?
No.
So Warp is a terminal window. And again, I'm not a coder, so these things are pretty nerdy even for me, right? So a terminal window is like, basically the prompt area of your Mac.
It's the big scary thing that like I get nervous when I open the terminal window and someone's like, do it in terminal. I'm like, okay.
So Warp is a terminal that is a terminal, but with an agent built into it. And you can choose what foundational model that you like to use.
Yeah.
And then when you write in your terminal, where you normally would have to like write code, you can just write in whatever language you want, and then you can basically ask it to do things. So for example, and then you can utilize all these amazing small features that are available in GitHub that you would never know how to install. So you can either go, hey, I need to install the last 10 episodes of Dan's podcast from YouTube, and then there's something called YL something, which is like a piece of software that nerdy people know how to use. And it's a string only kind of feature. And so go install that on your computer. It'll then kind of like figure out how to write the right prompt. You'll download those things. And then you might say, actually I need this in MPEG-4 because I have a podcast. Yeah. So to start with, you can just do that. Now, what's cool about it is that you'll be able to ask it things that has many steps, and it will create like an agentic to-do list. And you can have like this just basically YOLO button where you just ask it to continue to do that. Now, I also then convert all my notes from Notion to Obsidian, which is basically an open source competitor to Notion. But instead of storing it on the cloud, it stores it in Markdown files. So now suddenly your agents have access to all your stuff, and you can completely have it rearrange it. So for example, I was applying to renew my visa. I got like a long to-do list from my lawyer of things I had to find, like, tax returns and stuff like that. And so I then give that to the agent and saying, go wild on my computer. You have full access. Go and find everything you need, and then make a Markdown file, both which all the different files that I've been asked for, write them up as my lawyer has asked, but then also write me an overview file. And by the way, when you're done, write the letter to the lawyer that just gives him an overview of where you stole all these different things. And you press it, and you go to your next meeting, and you come back like half an hour later, and hey presto, it's like 80% there.
Wow.
It's very cool.
You mentioned that entrepreneurship and entrepreneurial skills, it's one of the most important ways that people can future-proof their careers. What are some of those key skills as you see them, whether people are launching businesses or not?
One of the things that we always looked at pre-hype was what is the kind of characteristics of somebody who is an entrepreneur and who might be successful. And we had like these 3 things that we always kind of like identify. And the first thing was what we called agitation, which is basically agency, like that you're somebody who push things forward. The second thing is really that you have the ability to craft a narrative around a problem you see and make that narrative kind of compelling for people to kind of support it. That could be your boss, but it could also be your future staff and customers. And the third thing is a bit of resourcefulness, that you have the ability to do you can do a lot with a little.
Mm-hmm.
And so those things, as I'm looking into the future and looking at what is some of the skills that you need, even as a staff member, it's probably a little bit the same, right? AI will give you an Iron Man suit to really allow you to do much more with less. But that doesn't really matter if you don't understand how to see problems and you don't take initiative. And it doesn't matter if you can't articulate either to the model or to your boss why, and how they should be done differently. And it doesn't matter if you can't use your curiosity to try all these different tools that's available to you. And so, yeah, I really think entrepreneurship is good for the world, because I do think that more people solving problems would be neat, but I also think it's good for people as individuals, because I think that's a future-proofing kind of skill.
We were talking about relationship capital. I want to ask you about one of your relationships, because while your book is not written to be funny, there was one absolute laugh out loud moment for me, which is that you met your Bark co-founder while sharing a heart-shaped bed on a cruise.
That is unfortunately true. So Matt and I were both kind of like in what I think of as our in-between time. So I was just setting up Prehype. He was working in Dark Patch Labs, which was kind of like an accelerator. And he had started Meetup before and didn't really know what to do next. And I was figuring out. And so we both went to the Summit Series conference. And at that year, it was on a boat. And if you picked the cheapest tickets, they would just randomly pair you with somebody you didn't know before, and they would put you in a cabin together. Now, obviously, people didn't know each other, so they've taken the beds and they have kind of like pushed them apart and made 2 separate beds on them. I checked in first and thought it would be hilarious to put the beds back together. And so I took the beds back together, made it as one, and then went drinking. And so I came back to the cabin at 2 a.m, and Matt had checked in, went up, got some drinks, but then went early to bed. And so first time I ever wake up, I'm in this awkward position where I'm like in my boxers and trying to shake the hand of this dude that I've never met before over the shared blanket in
of a heart-shaped bed.
In a heart-shaped bed. So, but then, we spent a lot of time talking about entrepreneurship and I think really shared kind of like principles, and we ended up building Bark and meeting Carly, our third co-founder, and rest is history.
Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for coming back on the show. I really enjoy looking into the future with you.
I appreciate it. Thanks. I'll come back anytime.